Charles Leclerc just did something in Bahrain that could change Ferrari's entire season before it even begins. On the final day of pre-season testing, in front of Fred Vasseur, in front of Lewis Hamilton, in front of every rival engineer watching the timing screens, Leclerc unleashed a lap that stunned the paddock. 1 minute, 30.811 seconds. Fastest of the entire test. 331 kilometers per hour at the end of the straight. Full throttle applied 15 meters earlier than Mercedes out of turn 10. Nearly 4/10 clear of Red Bull in comparable conditions. And this was not a show run. Not an empty tank trick. Not a desperate headline attempt. It was controlled. Calculated. Repeatable. But here is the real reason this matters. This lap did not just shake Red Bull. It shook Ferrari. Because inside that garage sits a 7-time world champion adapting to a new team, and a team principal trying to balance 2 alpha drivers. And in one brutal qualifying simulation, Leclerc reminded everyone who has been carrying this project for years. The real question is not whether Ferrari is fast. The real question is whether this was the moment Leclerc reasserted himself as the leader of Ferrari's new era. And the data behind that lap tells a much bigger story than you think. Stay with me. What makes this moment even more powerful is how controlled it was. Because this was not chaos. It was precision. Late morning in Bahrain. Track temperature rising. Wind settling. Grip improving with every lap. Ferrari waited. They did not rush. They sent Leclerc out when conditions were optimal. C4 compound. Low fuel window. Engine mode aligned for a qualifying simulation. This was deliberate. And from the very first corner, you could see the difference. The car rotated instantly into turn 1. No hesitation on entry. No snap on exit. Just clean, confident traction. Sector 1 turned purple immediately. That tells you something important. The hybrid deployment is aggressive. The power unit release is sharp. But more importantly, the rear stayed stable under load. 331 kilometers per hour before braking. No toe. No slipstream advantage. That is aerodynamic efficiency. And efficiency in Bahrain means one thing. Straight line dominance without sacrificing downforce. But here is where it becomes more serious. Sector 2 was even stronger. High-speed direction changes through turns 11 and 12. These corners expose weak rear ends. They punish instability. Leclerc did not lift. The SF26 stayed planted, almost glued to the asphalt. Minimal steering correction. Maximum minimum speed. That is not driver bravery alone. That is platform stability. And when a car is stable at high speed, the driver's confidence multiplies. Now consider the internal context. Lewis Hamilton was inside the garage studying the data. Adapting to a new environment. Learning brake migration, steering weight, energy deployment characteristics. Leclerc already looked at home. That visual difference matters. Because Formula 1 is not only about lap times. It is about perception inside the team. Engineers naturally gravitate toward the driver who unlocks peak performance most easily. And Leclerc, in that moment, looked completely synchronized with the machine. But the most revealing detail came out of turn 10. The telemetry showed Leclerc applying full throttle noticeably earlier than Mercedes. Roughly 15 meters earlier. 15 meters is the difference between defending and attacking into the next braking zone. That traction comes from Ferrari's exhaust-driven diffuser concept, energizing airflow at low speed and stabilizing the rear. For years, Ferrari struggled in traction zones. They overheated the rears. They slid on exit. Not this time. And that is why Vasseur's reaction was so controlled. He did not celebrate wildly. He did not overreact. Because he knows something critical. One lap pace is intoxicating. But it can also distort expectations. And we have not yet addressed the part of the story that makes this even more complex. Because when the fuel load increases, when the stint extends beyond 12 laps, the picture begins to shift. And that is where this narrative takes its most important turn. And this is where the excitement becomes tension. Because when Ferrari moved from qualifying trim to race simulation, the numbers changed. Not dramatically, but enough to matter. On the C3 compound, with heavier fuel loads, Leclerc's pace started strong. The opening laps were controlled. Competitive. Stable. But after roughly 12 to 14 laps, the rear tire temperatures began to climb. The lap times began to fade. 0.2. Then 3. Over a single lap, that is invisible. Over a race distance, that becomes vulnerability. And Red Bull knows exactly how to exploit that. Max Verstappen does not need the fastest car on Saturday. He needs consistency on Sunday. If Ferrari starts from pole position, the first stint becomes everything. If they manage the rear tires in clean air, they can control the tempo. If degradation accelerates, Verstappen will wait. He always waits. Now here is where the internal Ferrari dynamic becomes fascinating. Lewis Hamilton spent the final day completing nearly 150 laps. Long runs. Aerodynamic comparisons. Full race simulations. He described the car as sensitive but powerful. Sensitive means the operating window is narrow. If the track temperature drops slightly, the balance shifts. If wind hits through turn 4, the rear becomes nervous. This is a car that rewards precision and punishes imperfection. Leclerc appears naturally aligned with its aggressive front end. He thrives on rotation. He commits early to the apex. Hamilton is analytical. He builds understanding step by step. He studies degradation curves, energy deployment patterns, brake balance evolution over a stint. 2 elite approaches. 1 delicate machine. And here is the real strategic question. If Ferrari must choose a development direction in the opening races, do they prioritize raw qualifying dominance? Or long-run stability? Because whichever path they lean toward will shape the championship fight. Testing in Bahrain has revealed something undeniable. Ferrari has the speed to challenge. They have the reliability foundation. They have completed the mileage without major mechanical failures. But they are walking a fine line. A car that can shock the paddock on Saturday must survive Sunday under pressure. And that brutal fastest lap from Leclerc did more than top the timing sheets. It raised expectations. Inside the garage. Inside the media. Inside the minds of their rivals. Now the pressure is real. Because when the lights go out at the Bahrain Grand Prix, no one will remember the test headline. They will remember only one thing. Did that terrifying one-lap pace translate into control when it truly mattered? That answer is coming. And it will define whether this was simply a spectacular testing moment, or the first sign that Ferrari is ready to take the fight back to the front. Now we reach the part nobody inside Ferrari will say out loud, but everyone is thinking. Expectations have changed. Before Bahrain testing, Ferrari's objective was simple. Close the gap. Show progress. Stay within reach of Red Bull. After that fastest lap, the narrative shifted. Now the question is not whether Ferrari can compete. The question is whether they can win immediately. And that is a completely different kind of pressure. Because when you are chasing, every small gain feels like progress. When you are suddenly seen as a threat, every weakness becomes magnified. That brutal lap from Leclerc did not just impress the paddock. It forced Ferrari into the spotlight. Rivals are no longer dismissing them as hopeful contenders. They are studying them. They are analyzing the rear wing rotation system. They are evaluating the straight line efficiency. They are reviewing traction data out of slow corners. And most importantly, they are asking one silent question. Can Ferrari repeat this under race pressure? Because testing offers perfect scenarios. Clean air. Controlled fuel loads. No wheel-to-wheel battles. A Grand Prix does not. Now imagine the opening lap in Bahrain. Leclerc starts from pole position. Verstappen lines up beside him. The desert air is slightly cooler than during testing. The wind shifts marginally through turn 4. The operating window narrows. This is where that word sensitive returns. If the balance moves even slightly outside its ideal range, the car becomes nervous. And in Formula 1, nervous cars do not dominate championships. They survive them. But here is the counter-argument. Ferrari has solved problems that haunted them for years. The rear traction weakness appears corrected. The straight-line speed disadvantage seems gone. Reliability, across hundreds of laps, held firm. This is not the Ferrari of recent seasons. This is a team that has built something sharp. And Leclerc, more than anyone, looks ready to use it. There was something in his body language during that lap. Calm. Focused. Almost clinical. Not desperate. That is the sign of a driver who believes the car will respond exactly as he expects. And belief in Formula 1 is dangerous for rivals. Because once a driver trusts the platform beneath him, he pushes boundaries others hesitate to approach. But here is the final layer. If Ferrari truly has built a car capable of securing pole position consistently, if Leclerc continues extracting that final tenth, Red Bull will be forced into reactive strategies. Aggressive undercuts. Riskier tire calls. Higher deployment modes earlier in stints. Pressure shifts championships. And that is why this pre-season moment matters more than it should. Not because testing decides titles, but because it reveals hierarchy. And in Bahrain, for one brutal lap, Charles Leclerc looked like the man in control. The real battle now is not whether Ferrari is fast. It is whether they can turn that speed into authority over an entire race weekend. Because if they can, the balance of power in Formula 1 might already be starting to tilt. And this is where everything converges. Because pre-season testing is not about trophies. It is about signals. And Ferrari just sent one. For 3 days in Bahrain, the SF26 accumulated serious mileage. No major mechanical failures. No dramatic stoppages. Cooling systems held. The power unit delivered consistently. That reliability changes the baseline. In previous seasons, Ferrari's raw pace often came with fragility. Speed, but uncertainty. This time, the foundation looks stable. Now combine that with Leclerc's one-lap dominance. Fastest time of the entire test. Purple sectors in the most demanding parts of the circuit. Top speed matching, even exceeding, Red Bull without a slipstream. That is not coincidence. That is engineering progress. But here is the final tension point. The SF26 is quick. Very quick. Yet it remains a narrow window car. Small variations in wind. Minor shifts in temperature. Slight pressure changes in the tires. All of it influences balance. Lewis Hamilton described it as powerful but sensitive. That description is revealing. Because a sensitive car in the hands of a confident driver can look spectacular. But over a championship, sensitivity must be controlled. And this is where Leclerc's brutal fastest lap becomes more than a statistic. It becomes a benchmark. Inside Ferrari, engineers now know what the car can achieve at its absolute peak. That lap is the reference. Every setup from this point forward will chase that feeling. Every qualifying session will aim to replicate that stability through Sector 2. Every race simulation will try to protect the rear tires without sacrificing that explosive traction out of Turn 10. And that is a dangerous place to be for rivals. Because when a team understands its ceiling, development accelerates. But the ceiling is not the championship. Consistency is. So the season opener in Bahrain will answer one defining question. Was Leclerc's lap a glimpse of sustainable superiority? Or the perfect storm of ideal conditions? If Ferrari locks out the front row and manages degradation intelligently, the narrative shifts permanently. If they fade on Sunday, the doubts return instantly. And that is why Fred Vasseur looked composed rather than euphoric. He understands the weight of expectation. He knows that shocking the paddock in testing is easy compared to controlling a Grand Prix under pressure. But one thing is undeniable. Charles Leclerc did not look like a driver waiting for a new teammate to take over. He looked like a driver staking his claim. Calm, precise, unapologetically fast. Pre-season testing does not crown champions. But sometimes, it reveals intent. And in Bahrain, Ferrari revealed intent. The only thing left now is whether that brutal speed can survive the heat of race day, the pressure of strategy calls, and the relentless consistency of Max Verstappen. Because if it can, this season may begin with something far more explosive than anyone expected.